So hello, welcome everyone to our I-CBT Friday discussion group. I'm Mary Hosbrough, one of the co-facilitators for these discussions, along with Margaret McCall and Sylvie Levine. And we're a group of clinicians who meet regularly on Fridays to share information about learning I-CBT to expand awareness and healthy discussion. So thank you so much for being here and being part of this. If you're new here, or if you're watching this recording, I want to share a bit about our format for these gatherings. So some Fridays, we have general open I-CBT discussions, and other times we have presentations about the modules, panel discussions about the modules, or presentations on special topics. And most of those are recorded and available on the website, icbt.online, and on the I-CBT YouTube channel. So once we get started, I'll drop those links in the chat. And if you found your way here to this live event, it was probably through the I-CBT Facebook group for clinicians and researchers. And that's where you can find out what the event or topic is each Friday under the events tab. So today we will have a special topic presentation by Michael Parker, and I'll ask Mike to introduce himself and his topic in a moment. We ask that if you have questions or comments during the presentation, you're invited to raise your digital hand, which you'll find under the reactions in your Zoom toolbar. Or if you can't find that, just wave your hand and I'll try to watch for you. And we'll call on you to unmute. You could put chat questions in the chat, and I'll try to keep an eye on the chat as well while Michael is presenting. So please be careful to protect your client privacy when asking questions. It's best to make the questions general about concepts rather than specific client questions, and definitely avoid sharing anything that might be identifiable about a client. There are many ongoing consultation groups, and some Fridays we do peer consultation during our open discussion. So you can save case-specific questions for consultations. And we'll have one of those open discussions next week as well. So with that, I will welcome Mike to take over and introduce yourself and share what you're going to share with us today. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Mary. I'm psyched to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So today I'm going to be presenting a little presentation I put together to address what you kind of need to do when you're first learning I-CBT as someone who's done ERP. But let me introduce myself first, I guess. My name is Michael Parker. I'm a therapist in private practice in the Pittsburgh area. I run a little YouTube channel called OCD Space, where I talk about all things OCD, and wrote a book called the OCD Travel Guide. That's a self-help book if you're looking for an extra resource on ERP and ACT approaches to OCD. And so today, though, I'm going to be talking about I-CBT, which is kind of like the world I've been immersed in for probably 3 years now, actually, when I took a look at the calendar. And it's been an amazing journey. It's a great treatment, but it is a little tricky to learn, especially when you've been doing other approaches. So I think everybody has a little bit of difficulty when they're first trying to learn it. But yeah, so I'll be going through the slides, but at the same time, I think if people have questions, I'd love for this to be a discussion as I move through the slides. So feel free to ask questions, and we can talk about things that come up for you all as I'm talking. So let me find my presentation here. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to be doing I-CBT 101 for specifically ERP therapists, or how to forget a lot of the stuff you think you know about OCD, because you really have to. You really have to. And let's see if I can get my slides to change here. There we go. Okay, so sometimes you have to look at things from a different angle. And, that's what this shift is all about. When you've been doing ERP, when you've been doing ACT, and you want to learn I-CBT, it really is looking at things from a different angle. Because when you really specialize in a treatment like ERP, you develop a schema in your brain, and it's the way you formulate everything. It's the way you think about everything your client says to you, and how you think you should react and what you should tell them to do. And ICBT actually is built upon a completely different schema, and so you have to kind of internalize that to do it. And so why all the fuss? Why focus on learning ICBT so deeply? Isn't there just a light version of treatment? Can I just pick and choose a few concepts? And I would say it's possible, and I think people are doing that. I'm seeing a lot more people just talk about doubts instead of intrusive thoughts, and I'm seeing people talk about trust. I'm seeing people talk about the OCD story instead of the obsession. But it's more just like sprinkling it into their existing treatments. So there are people doing that. They're still doing ERP, but they're kind of using some language from I-CBT. And I think you could do that, and there's probably value in that. Some of the language is really helpful. And I actually did that myself when I was writing the OCD travel guide. I was finishing it up right when I was first learning I-CBT, and I did the sprinkling. I threw in some of the kind of words of I-CBT, but I really didn't, understand it yet. But I would say that you're not really doing I-CBT when you do that, when you just use the language and you just use a couple concepts, because for the people that benefit from I-CBT, from my own experience and from talking to other therapists and other people with lived experience who have gone through I-CBT, the stuff that is really beneficial about I-CBT is the real foundational shift away from ERP and using a new framework and a new understanding of what OCD is and how you treat it. And so I truly believe if you want to practice I-CBT, you have to learn it on a deep foundational level to practice it correctly. And you have to let that schema get in your head and do the treatment fully. So I would say, there's not really a light version of I-CBT. You can take some of the language, but really, like, the goal, if you want to learn it, is to dive into it and commit. And it's a great journey. So, does this mean you're criticizing the other approaches by saying you got to forget them and take on I-CBT? And absolutely not. No. ERP and ACT, if we're going to just take the big three that I hear everyone talking about these days, have mountains of evidence behind them, and they have been proven to be effective, and they're mainstays of OCD treatment, even anxiety treatment, phobic treatment. And so, no, we would not want to discard those treatments. We want to actually still maintain competency in all these approaches. Because you really are, doing a pure treatment, on paper should work perfectly, but it really doesn't when you're working with individuals. And people have multiple diagnoses, and people have like different forms and different flavors of OCD and different personalities and different things that work for them. And so, sometimes, we all know, for those of us who've been doing ERP for decades, know it doesn't work for everybody. People drop out. People don't connect to it. They don't get to where they want to be with it. And so having this new treatment is great. But there's going to be people that don't respond to I-CBT, and you need those other tools for people that are going to respond to other treatments better. So I would say, as anybody wanting to specialize in OCD, I think knowing all three of those treatments is really the ideal, because you've got to work with your clients from different perspectives. Everybody in the field and all your clients are going to be coming from different approaches, and you want to have that vocabulary to communicate with them. All the higher levels of care are probably still mostly ERP and ACT, and you have to kind of know those approaches to be a specialist and work in this field. So but that being said, you do need to forget what you know from the other treatment to really learn I-CBT, and that's what this presentation is going to be about. And then it goes the other way. To learn ERP, man, would you have a lot to forget with I-CBT to take on that schema. Okay, so learning a new approach. Here's the things I'm going to focus on forgetting for people that really want to learn I-CBT and are stuck in the schema of different treatment models. And we're going to be looking at one, forgetting that OCD is a phobic disorder. Two, that intrusive thoughts are an important element in the OCD experience. Three, intolerance of uncertainty is a characteristic that comes with having OCD. Four, all reassurance is bad. And five, behaviors, compulsions are the problems we need to target. And you just got to love this about I-CBT. I-CBT is like, I don't care about the precedent and all these assumptions. We're going to start new from a totally different perspective. And that's one of the really exciting things about it. So number one, try and forget OCD is a phobic disorder. Mary, could I ask, are my slides coming across fully in the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure, because I get a little window on top of my slides. I'm moving around with everyone's face. But okay, so try and forget OCD is a phobic disorder. Other approaches help clients with OCD to overcome a fear in the same way we would treat a fear of spiders or a fear of heights. So it really is looking at OCD as just almost like another form of having a phobia. Your obsessions are fears. But I-CBT proposes that with OCD, the issue isn't the client's fear response to the scenario, but the thinking process that's leading the client to imagine and become absorbed in the scenario. In other words, if the scenario is actually occurring, it makes total sense that you're engaging in these compulsions. But how did you decide the scenario is occurring? So, for a lot of people with OCD, we would say, like, yeah, you should be scared of, your relationship falling apart. You should be scared of being rejected by God. You should be scared of, being someone that would hurt children. Those are healthy fears to have, but we want to figure out how the heck did you think your way into thinking that's happening? And the difference would be, with fears, with phobias, it's really the trigger is the same thing as the thing you're scared of. So the trigger of seeing a spider is actually what you're actually scared of. You're scared of being around spiders. You're scared of being in a high place, and you get triggered when you go to the high place. And so exposure therapy makes complete sense, right? Keep going to high places over and over and over again, habituate. But with OCD, someone who's scared of hurting kids is not objectively scared of kids' birthday parties. Like, that's their trigger, going to the birthday party. But that's not actually their fear. Their fear is all the story that they get absorbed in when they're in the kids' party. And it's a stretch, right? The kids' party means this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and you go on a tangent in your imagination, and then you end up at a place that is truly terrifying. And so we are saying that, with I-CBT, let's try a different approach here. We've been treating this like a fear, like any other fear. What do we do about all that thinking that's leading the person to believe these scary stories and think themselves into that? And let's really target that. And for a lot of people, in the little laboratory that's my practice, they're like, finally, people that have been doing ERP and the exposure therapy kind of helped, but it didn't help them with the thinking. They wanted to understand, why the heck is this happening to me over and over again? And this is helping people frame it differently than a fear, and help that thinking process called inferential confusion that is so specific to OCD. And this is the treatment to address that issue. So yeah, phobia, my fear shows up when the feared thing is present. OCD, my fear is happening in response to an imagined scenario. So that's a big thing to forget when you've been thinking, for years in that area. Okay, try and forget OCD as an intrusive thoughts problem. I-CBT does away with the idea that individuals with OCD are experiencing random intrusive thoughts the same as everyone else, and that they simply don't understand that these thoughts are inherently meaningless. So that's kind of like what we've been working from as an assumption, that everybody gets intrusive thoughts, and someone who has an obsession had a random intrusive thought, and that was like the beginning of the OCD. They made a bigger deal out of the thought than they should have, and they started avoiding, and they started doing rituals, and now the intrusive thought has become an obsession. And from that model, it all starts with a random, meaningless, intrusive thought that happened once upon a time. Now, from I-CBT, individuals with OCD are drawing conclusions through a reasoning process. The thoughts that individuals with OCD experience are actually the conclusions or inferences they are reaching. And so there's a lot happening before the person experiences or generates that thought or that feared scenario in their imagination. And we want to understand the process. Other treatments focus entirely on the client's response to the thought. I-CBT looks at everything that leads up to the person having the thought, aka the inference. And so we're really looking at what happens when you come across a trigger. What's the kind of baggage you're bringing into that situation that makes you feel vulnerable? And then what is the thinking you're doing after you encounter that trigger? We're looking at all that stuff. And then eventually the thought happens, and then the compulsion. But this is crazy, right? Intrusive thoughts. Like, who works with OCD that doesn't talk about intrusive thoughts all the time? This is a huge, for lack of a better term, sacred cow of our field, right? And this is a huge shift, and it is so hard to think of it in any other way other than these are intrusive thoughts. I'll get a little visual for that, right? Intrusive thoughts are clients walking around getting zapped by thoughts that come out of nowhere, versus inferences. Do clients go through a reasoning process that leads them to these conclusions? And so really we're saying like intrusive thoughts almost like aren't a thing, really. Like, erase that from your memory. I-CBT still says they happen, but it's just not part of the OCD experience. That's in a relevant way. And there's actually like a really good article. It was in the IOCDF newsletter, like within the last year, and it was kind of about the history of intrusive thoughts. And I was surprised to learn that that term only started getting applied to OCD in like the 80s. And it was something that had been sort of applied to it from the world of like PTSD with war vets coming back from Vietnam. And they were obviously having intrusive images of things that they had seen. And then this guy, I think his name's Stanley Rackman, he said, that kind of sounds like OCD. And then he applied intrusive thoughts to OCD. And, I think that's probably a good thing. Like, that seemed to really work and be really helpful for a while. But this is just adding a brand new kind of deeper understanding to really the OCD experience. It's not just, I don't know what to do with my random intrusive thoughts. Like, that's not the problem. It's like, these thoughts are the things that I worry about because I feel vulnerable in some way as a person. Okay. Try and forget OCD is an intolerance of uncertainty problem. I-CBT has specific definitions of uncertainty and doubt, and this can seem a little bit like word policing at first. And I wanted to put that in there because I think people have that reaction when they hear someone from an I-CBT perspective want very specific definitions for what uncertainty is and what doubt is. But they are actually important distinctions for the understanding of this approach. And so I know everybody has things that they think uncertainty means. Everybody has a different idea of what uncertainty means, and everybody has a different idea of what doubt means. But for this approach, it creates some very specific definitions, and I was confused by it at first, and I'm really happy though that I I took the time to understand what those terms mean in I-CBT and got that clarity because it really helps. So uncertainty, tolerating uncertainty is helpful in situations when more information is on the way and we must simply wait for it. So when we finish an exam or we have a job interview or we submit to a biopsy, there's a period of time we must tolerate as we wait for the results or further information. And so, as a therapist, someone walks into your office and they're super anxious. They just had to, give, a breast biopsy or something like that. And, as a therapist, you just have to empathize, like, gosh, that's awful. And, what can you do but help that person tolerate those, those days or weeks until they get an answer? That makes total sense. What else can you do but tolerate uncertainty in that situation? And particularly because there's more information on the way, there's an end to it. So yeah, let's tolerate this. OCD obsessions are not circumstances that require tolerating uncertainty because there's no more information on the way. With OCD, the problem is obsessional doubt, which is the excessive questioning and distrusting of the available information that is already present. If the individual can reestablish trust in themselves, their senses, and the information they have available, they can eliminate the obsessional doubt, and there's nothing to tolerate. The goal is functional certainty. That's how everyone else is living. And so, this is like a very controversial thing for I-CBT to be bringing into question, but I've learned to extremely value this perspective because I think I've probably been a little glib in the past as a therapist when I've said, yeah, maybe, maybe not, maybe the bad thing will happen, maybe it won't. You've got to learn to accept that. But I've realized that I don't do that. I don't only go to bed at night because I'm literally thinking 50-50. I might be someone who hurts children, or I might be someone who wants to hurt themselves, or, and I've just accepted the uncertainty of that. That's not how my mind works. My mind has always been, how do I develop the confidence or the belief in myself to not have to worry about those things. And, we've been kind of operating under the assumption that someone with OCD isn't capable of that. And we have to tell them to tolerate uncertainty and because they can't handle just 99%, they need 100%. But I've come to, completely change my view on that. I think someone with OCD is completely capable of living with 99% uncertainty if they could just have some confidence and some belief and stop doubting and stop distrusting themselves. So are those with OCD just bad at accepting the uncertainty that they could be a pedophile? They hopefully, I know there's words on YouTube that you get flagged. I hope that's okay. They might have cancer. They might have hit someone on the way to work. They might be suicidal. That's an important question for us to ask ourselves. Is that really the problem, that you just can't accept that this might or might not be happening? Or have you developed a whole story about yourself that really makes you feel vulnerable to these things, and you're doubting yourself in these areas when you don't really need to be doubting yourself because there's not information that is telling you should doubt yourself? Okay, try and forget all reassurance is bad. I-CBT is a return to talking to clients about the thinking that is leading them to believe their obsessional theme. So the word belief there, we're really wanting to go back to that. Clients with OCD actually do have a belief in their obsession to some degree, that this is valid, that this is relevant to them. However, we are not simply supplying arguments against the possibilities or questions that our clients are considering. We're not going to come up with some argument to prove that one of those bumps on your car ride, wasn't a person. I'm not going to sit there and argue with it. We are helping our clients to identify, trust, and process the available, indisputable information that exists in reality so that they no longer see value in following doubts into their imagination. So, sometimes when people first encounter I-CBT, that's kind of like how they use it at first. And I've done that, and other people have done that you start thinking, oh, I've got to kind of do almost a CBT approach and argue with the logic of my client's obsession. And that's really not the real intent of I-CBT. The real intent is help clients identify what is the information that they really know for sure and have available, and help them activate and reconnect with their own thinking and their own common sense again, and draw opinion, develop opinions and draw conclusions again with healthy reasoning that is only using the stuff is true. That's really what we're doing. We don't actually have to get totally into the content. We want to explore the content a little bit, but ultimately at the end of the day, we're saying, what do you know for sure? Let's base our thinking just on those things. Let's stop going into possibilities, because possibilities are not relevant. For clients who are accustomed to any discussion in this area being labeled reassurance, the overuse of the term reassurance, right? Let's not talk about it at all. This will be new and maybe even uncomfortable territory at first. It's going to feel scary, I'm not supposed to talk about, why I'm scared I'm going to drown my baby. I'm supposed to realize that's, just a silly thought and just, not pay any attention to it. And we're saying, well, let's go into why you think and believe you're going to do that. And that's a little bit of a twist from where the field was really headed before I-CBT, in my opinion, which was really eliminating more and more things as reassurance. It was kind of going down that path to the point where we weren't talking about content at all. And then we weren't even talking about the client's beliefs at all, or what was going on in their head to some degree. We're just saying, ignore that, do the exposure. So a little bit of a shift. And I have an important note at the bottom, though. Engaging in actual reassurance seeking is still a no-no in I-CBT. In other words, repetitively supplying information to your client while your client makes no effort to use that information to draw conclusions and move on is still a dynamic to be identified and corrected. We still, while we're talking about things, want to make sure we're helping our clients trust their own thinking again and their ability to reason, and that they're really processing information and getting out of that state of confusion, starting to really differentiate between the things they know for sure and the things they imagined, and only going with what they know. And the beauty is people with OCD can totally do this. And that's the great thing about I-CBT. I love it.
Mike, we do have a question in the chat.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Question is, I'm coming from a DBT lens and mapping I-CBT to current language and knowledge. Could I equate this to emotional regulation skill of checking the facts and mindfulness skill of observe, describe, participate as effectively the situation requires? So I don't know about your DBT knowledge and if that is something you could answer or not.
I feel a little unequipped to answer that because I don't have a lot of DBT knowledge. Does anybody else present today feel like
Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
Yeah. I will say that if it sounds like there's some overlap there, and that there may very well be. Yeah.
And is dropping a graphic into, oh, Stephanie, sorry.
No, it's fine. What I was going to say is I think this runs into some of the same issue that we see with trying to equate I-CBT language with ERP language, where even if the wording can seem similar, the concept behind it is different. And so it is so incredibly hard to kind of forget what you know, as Mike has been saying. But I think rather than trying to align with what you already know, almost try and forget what you know, like Men in Black pen style. But like it sounds really hard, but I think that probably is going to be more effective in the long run. Harder in the short term, more effective in the long run.
I just put in the chat because I am not trained well enough in DBT, and so I don't know that specific skill, but I created just a difference between mindfulness and reality sensing, because we do get that question a lot, saying this just sounds like mindfulness, and there is a distinct difference. So I put that in there.
And I appreciate that. Like, that was my question. And I appreciate that idea of forgetting what you know and don't know. It's just when I have clients long term, I need to also build on what they already know. Does that make sense? So the language is something that they can bridge and then use, because they already know, they already have these skills. We practice and we reinforce. So the language is, okay, so now we're going to work on this, and let's go back to that factual skill. Can you touch it? Can you lick it? Can you smell it? Can you, right? In this moment.
Right.
So,
but part of the problem is that when you're saying, can you touch it? Can you lick it? Can you smell it? You're going to have somebody with contamination OCD who's going to turn around and go, no, but even if it was there, right. And that's part of when we're bringing in our common sense. And that's part of when we're bringing in our other senses and our other direct evidence. And I think I'm somebody that actually likes being really specific with my wording. So I actually love that part of I-CBT, but it does feel very nuanced, and it's because it is. And I think just like we're reteaching other things, you know, people come into our office going, oh my God, I'm just so obsessed with, you know, Harry Potter. Well, you're not actually obsessed. That's different than the word obsession in the way that we use it in OCD treatment. So just like we're teaching them new language and new definitions of other things, we can retrain them.
I also would be interested in pursuing this as a separate conversation another time too, because Misty, the way you describe that, it does sound similar to using some reality sensing skills. So maybe in a more in-depth conversation about, you know, getting the education that I would need about the DBT skill, seeing if there is some overlap and some differences that could be explored. So thank you for bringing the question up, for sure. And then I hope we can revisit again too, if that sounds okay.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I wish I did have more DBT. It's one of the treatments I've always wanted to delve into and never have found the time, because, you know, I like to go deeply into things and really get them at the foundation. And I would want to do that before going into DBT. But yeah, so I would say, you know, if you see shades of overlap, but you're still kind of working from the other foundation of that treatment, just keep using the language of that other treatment. There probably isn't any need to put in the I-CBT language if you're not going to go fully into I-CBT. But, you know, I mean, from I-CBT, the thing, and the thing about today's presentation is this is basically like precursor to module 1. Before you delve into I-CBT deeply, see if you can unlearn these things as much as possible. Because when you dive into I-CBT, really what you're doing is entering into a treatment that is very specific for inferential confusion. And it's very specific for addressing an issue, which is clients walking around life with a lack of trust in themselves in a specific area. And that leading to some really major reasoning problems that leads them to get absorbed in their imagination and believe things that are, you know, untrue. And so so really, like, I-CBT is very much focused on that, which is obsessional doubt, rejecting information I see it in the present, going into my imagination. And so all the language is built upon that real foundation that you're working with a client with obsessional doubt. So I don't know of any other treatments that really target inferential confusion and obsessional doubt. And so keep that in mind, that that's really the intention of the I-CBT strategies to address that. But that's a whole 12 modules. So we're not going to be able to get to all that in this presentation. But this is like, before you dive into I-CBT, like here's some assumptions to forget. What if clients can learn how to process the information they receive and use it to resolve doubt? Just a lovely idea. I can speak for myself. I've been guilty of thinking my clients might not be able to do that, might not be able to achieve that. And I-CBT has given me the tools to really help to make that happen. And it is so exciting. Okay, number 5, try and forget behaviors, compulsions are the thing we need to target. And this one is really hard to get out of your head. We are so used to, what compulsions did you do this week? That'll tell me how good you're doing. Compulsions are at the tail end of the OCD sequence. And the goal of I-CBT is to work as far upstream in the OCD sequence as possible. And once therapy addresses the initial reasoning that leads to the obsession, the compulsions that follow are no longer desirable to the client. And I, have experienced this firsthand, that I've actually done I-CBT with people and not actually talked very much about compulsions at all, and successfully, helped them, get into, what you might call remission or recovery. And it was like, it wasn't even a major topic of conversation what the compulsions were. It was just, what are the beliefs that you're having right now? Let's address those. And once those beliefs are addressed, the compulsions seem like a complete and utter waste of time for the individual. So it doesn't. That's like, the ideal intervention, the ideal administration of I-CBT with a client. It's not going to work that way with everybody. And I've also had clients where I did really need to address compulsions that were interfering with their ability to process the treatment, because the treatment's very psychoeducational, at least in the beginning. And I've definitely encountered clients that are having compulsions that they're engaging with the material in a very compulsive way. And we really did have to map out, what are the compulsions that are interfering with your ability to absorb the treatment, which is more of a response prevention approach. So I did need to incorporate that at times. But in general, like, it's really not the main focus of I-CBT. We're really looking at, I guess you could say it's kind of like talk therapy, but it's very experiential, and we're really helping people notice what the difference is between like imagining something and like knowing something, and acquainting themselves with that, and experiencing that, and then helping them not, cross over into the imagination. So we're talking through things and having an experiential treatment, and then we do response prevention, and we address rituals as needed, but we're not specifically saying stop your rituals, that's how you get better. We're actually, and that's why a lot of people who have gone through ERP have not had the results they wanted, is because they were told to stop their rituals and they would get better. And they did stop the rituals, and they tried as much as possible, and it didn't seem to do much, and they ended up kind of like frustrated. And it's because they were experiencing inferential confusion, and just stopping the rituals wasn't doing enough to help them get less confused. So yeah, it's wonderful to have, multiple treatments, multiple approaches. With I-CBT, we're working upstream, and we're looking at all the reasoning that's happening before the development of the obsession, and then before the compulsive response to the obsession. resolving things way upstream. And that's, I think that's all I've got for today. So 5 things to forget, guys. Forget those things and you'll like really have an easier time learning I-CBT, because it's doing away with a lot of those things. Thanks for having me. I'll take any questions.
I just want to jump in real quick. Thank you so much, Mike. That was like beautiful, and like took and distilled down some of the things that we meddle with, like as we're learning I-CBT, into something very, very understandable, I think. So I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, I have a question. I was a little bit late today, but are you suggesting that this presentation, which I noticed is being recorded, so we'll have access to it later? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Thank you. You're suggesting that this is a great lesson to cover, this overview lesson prior to beginning the modules. Is that correct?
In my opinion, this is definitely going to be very helpful to therapists to grapple with some of the issues they're going to be grappling with as they learn I-CBT.
Okay.
And so I think this could be very helpful to do before you jump into the treatment learning process. And others have suggested to me that this might even be something you could do with clients. Maybe if I made a client version, you could help some clients who have been immersed in the ERP world or the ACT world to better transition into I-CBT. And I actually haven't changed it to client language yet, but I did do it with a client who I was doing module 1 with, and she was having a lot of questions. And I did take her through this, and it really actually answered all her questions. And we went back to module 1, and she was more prepared. So I do think there might be something valuable about this for clients as well, because it is, yeah, it's there. The modules don't necessarily help address prior assumptions that clients are coming into I-CBT with. So this there might be a tool here that we could use.
Yeah, thank you again. I also, I think that the specific details that you are offering are answering those questions for me as a therapist that doesn't have OCD. I'm relating with them, but the way that you're explaining it is something that I need help with to be able to better deliver that to the clients, if that makes any sense. I'm not like Stephanie, where all the words and details are, that is not my strength. Anyway, are you doing any kind of individual consults or trainings? Just curious.
Yeah, I do offer consultation. I'll give you some contact information. My email is mike@pittsburghtherapyocd.com. And you can also just check out my website, pittsburghtherapyocd.com. And there's a form there for consultation.
Thanks.
But yeah, I mean, as I said, I've been immersed in this for 3 years. and I remember that feeling of like, oh, I really want to understand this stuff, and everybody else is explaining it so well, like, and I can't do it. I'm just trying to write down what everybody says, and but then eventually you do absorb it.
And there is another question in the chat. Are there specific subtypes that you're finding are more effective using I-CBT?
Yeah, so I'm finding it is extremely helpful for people that have specific beliefs and it's very clear that it's about themselves. So if someone feels they could be someone who harmed someone, or someone who's incompetent, or someone who is going to be rejected by others, just when you get a sense from a client that that's really fueling the OCD, I think that's like the ones where I've had the easiest time with, like providing I-CBT and it immediately clicking for them and being like, yeah, this is definitely what I need. And then it's a little trickier with obsessions when there is a little bit more of like maybe a phobic kind of presentation, like if it's a disgust-based contamination case, or maybe even a metaphobia or some things like that, where it doesn't always necessarily go directly back to them. Some clients I've found, or at least don't perceive it that way in their own mind. It's a little more work to do I-CBT from my experience, but I think we don't know. I think there's a lot we don't know about, like all the things we call OCD right now, and like if that is actually accurate, if there's more differentiation in diagnosis we need to do, and but really what you're looking for is this concept of inferential confusion. And that's what I-CBT is good for. And I'll just kind of reiterate that again. Inferential confusion is going to be someone who lacks a core trust in themselves in some area. And there's kind of a void there. And that leads to like very unhealthy reasoning, where they're applying a lot of out of context things to decide who they are, and getting confused about who they are, who they might be. This is specifically tailored for that specific issue.
And Mike, would you be willing to unshare your screen so people can see each other's faces right now?
Sure.
They haven't done that on their own already.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
The question, whether for you, Mike, or the whole group, I've always struggled finding like a definition for functional certainty, or how do people describe that? Because like I have that idea in my mind, but I'm wanting more for like a graphic so I can create a nice little graphic on social media. How do people put it succinctly? If anybody can.
So I would say it's, if you've really achieved it, it's like it doesn't keep you up at night. It's not something you worry about. Yeah, sure, there's possibilities there, but they seem completely irrelevant to you because there's no evidence that it's happening. And so it'd be like, yeah, not achieving perfect certainty, right? You can accept, like, yeah, there's possibilities. Anybody can realize there's always possibilities. But you would have no impulse or motivation to go into your head and think about those possibilities. I would imagine, though, for a lot of people, like there's a little bit of a spectrum, like I'm feeling more, I'm doing that less than I used to, and that feels good.
I always just kind of add, you function as though you're certain. And we've often hear even in ERP or OCD language in general, like, well, you can't be certain that the sun won't rise, but we act as though it will. Like we don't even worry about it. Those irrelevant possibilities and hypothetical things do not impact how we're living. Then that's functional certainty.
Thank you both. I appreciate that.
Mary, I think that was a terrific definition of just acting as if we do know what's going to happen. I think that's absolutely perfect.
Yeah, which is a very practical, definition. I think it's great. That is how we live. Yeah, it's not like, oh, I am absolutely certain because I have every, detail and every piece of information. It's like, no, I'm living as if I am. That there's nothing wrong with that. That makes that's functional. Absolutely.
I would add that just as folks would do in other realms, right? In other ways of their lives, that they consider whatever uncertainty they have because they don't have the information normal. It's normal and it's manageable and it doesn't interfere, right? But they do that in other ways, Mike, by the way, this is excellent. I wish that I would have had this the first time I encountered I-CBT, because I had all of these questions. You would have saved me a lot of stress. So this presentation is beautiful. Really well
Thanks.
done. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Connie. We're in the same boat. Yep. I'm just trying to help other people not have to have the struggle I had.
Great job. Really great job.
And Mike, I really appreciate that you've said that there is a place for the other treatment methods as well. You know, it's what's going to work for the client that's in front of you, because every client is different. And we know I-CBT is really effective for so many clients, but it's not going to work for everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. I absolutely agree.
Well, if there are more questions, or if there's more questions, I'm going to leave the recording on, so those will be captured as well. And if not, then I'll probably turn it off the recording and we can gush about the presentation and all the ways that we want to use it. Are there any more questions?
One other thing I just wanted to note is I think it's really important to recognize that this is a really complex conceptually, especially when you're asking people to forget what you know. I mean, that's really, really hard. And as somebody without lived experience, I found this a lot harder to grasp than some of my colleagues with lived experience. And practicing it and teaching it is part of how I figured it out. So yeah, I totally agree, but this is not conceptually easy. ERP conceptually is very easy, but doing it well is an art. Doing ERP well is absolutely an art form, but conceptually it's really simple. Whereas this conceptually is really, really hard.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for presenting, and for everyone for contributing to the discussion about this, which is what I love about this community, is that we do acknowledge, like, this is difficult to learn, and we're here to support each other while we're learning it. So this was a beautiful example of that. So thank you so much.